So I chair the Work and Pension Select Committee in Parliament. We started our work just after the 2019 general election, when I was elected chair. When we started in March 2020, we were, of course, immediately into lockdown, and for some time the committee met entirely virtually. But once we'd sort of shifted our focus away from the immediate question of the DWP's response to the pandemic, we started a series of inquiries on the impact of the pension freedoms introduced by George Osborne in 2015. And the last of our 3 reports about that was published last September. You might remember that prior to 2015, defined contribution pension pots almost always had to be converted into an annuity by the time the pensioner reached the age of 75. That had the advantage of securing an income for life, but the disadvantage of removing the pensioner's control over their savings. And a lot of people thought they could do better than obtain the seemingly rather modest annual income from putting all their hard-won savings into an annuity. So many people welcomed the pensions freedoms. Others were worried about pensioners accessing a very large pot of money without support over what to do with it, or the danger of running out of money rather late in their lives when they didn't have much chance to do anything about it. Pension freedoms coincided with the implementation of auto-enrolment. And many more people saving for retirement. So we wanted just to take a look at where these changes had brought us to. Hardly anybody now argues, or hardly anyone argued in their evidence to our committee, that the pension freedoms should be repealed, but there certainly are some challenges to be addressed. So in our 3rd inquiry on saving for later life, the report that I say published last September, we concluded that automatic enrolment has been a resounding success. The proportion of eligible workers saving in a pension has pretty much doubled from 44% in 2012 to 86% now. It is a rare example, I think, of a cross-party pensions policy success, devised under Labour, legislated for under the coalition, and implemented under a Conservative government. One of the things that I did in the period you were referring to earlier was I was Pensions Minister in 2006, when Adair Turner's Pensions Commission came forward with the idea of auto-enrolment. It's been good to see that it's worked out so well, and it's great that so many more people are now saving for their pension. The problem is they're not saving enough, and many people simply don't know that. We heard in our inquiry about an impending crisis as people discover they have not been saving enough for the kind of income that they want in their retirement. The Pensions Policy Institute calculates that fewer than 40% are on track for the target income replacement rates, which were defined in Adair Turner's Commission report. People in their 40s and above who missed out on older defined benefit pensions but haven't had time to build up an adequate pension through auto-enrolment, they are especially at risk. And Sir Steve Webb, who I think you're going to be hearing from shortly, told our committee that we are seeing, quote, a slow-motion car crash. So the 2 big challenges here are, number 1, a lot of people not contributing enough for the standard of living that they want in retirement. And number 2, others falling outside the scope of auto-enrolment as a result of low pay or self-employment. Tackling all of this is going to require a huge joint effort. Government, politicians, pensions industry, trade unions, individuals and employers. And on the question of how much people are saving, we were reminded in our inquiry that the Pensions Commission, Adair Turner's Commission, expected median earners to make additional savings above the basic contribution rates specified for auto-enrolment in order to get them to a reasonable place by the time they retire. But that simply has not happened. defaulting people in through auto-enrolment has worked brilliantly, but it's stopped there. So we called in our report for the government to get on and firstly implement the recommendations of the review of auto-enrolment, which was carried out in 2017. And they were that contributions should be taken from the first £1 of everybody's income each month, and that the minimum age for auto-enrolment should be reduced from 22 to 18. Those changes affect about 3 million workers, around half of them women. That was our recommendation, so I'm very pleased that the Pensions Extension of Auto-Enrolment number 2 bill has secured royal assent this week. Those changes have now been legislated for, and the government plans to consult on how they'll be implemented. Beyond that, we heard in our inquiry that the current minimum auto-enrolment contribution rates are just too low. In old defined benefit pension saving, contributions often amounted, with both employer and employee contributions, sometimes to 20% of people's income or more. With auto-enrolment, the minimum and also the norm in many cases is 8%. And it's that gap is the reason we've got this looming crisis as those who've been saving on this basis head for retirement. We need people to save more. We think the minimum rates of saving in auto-enrolment need to rise, but we recognise that trying to raise them in the middle of a cost of living crisis is unlikely to be well received. So for contribution rates to rise in the future, we think the case for the increase needs to be set out now. Work should start now to prepare the ground. We want to forge a consensus on all of this. We've had a great consensus over the introduction of auto-enrolment since 2006. We need a consensus for the way forward as well, including employers, trade unions, pensions industry, the wider public, and we need a cross-government commitment to develop a plan. So we called on the government for a new office to build and maintain an evidence base, set out the trade-offs, draw up a plan and a timetable for higher contributions, and also to report regularly to Parliament on progress on pensions adequacy. We also called for the office to focus on reducing the gender pensions gap. Unfortunately, we haven't got the office. The government rejected that in their reply. But I do very much welcome the decision of the Pensions Minister, Laura Trott, responding to our report to set out a definition of the gender pensions gap and to report regularly on that. First report, which showed a gender pensions gap of 35% between men and women. That report, I think, is an important step forward, and hopefully those reports will be regular. But in all of this, the role of employers is extremely important. Employers have fulfilled admirably the new obligations placed on them by auto-enrolment. We need employers also to help in increasing the amounts being saved into pensions. We've heard in our inquiry that initiatives like Save More Tomorrow, where employees commit in advance to saving a set proportion of future salary increases, that kind of thing works really well. But also at the moment, there are very few employers who have arrangements like that in place. We heard that many schemes and employers would like to do more to support their employees' pension saving, but they are worried about stepping across the boundary between, which is defined in law, between providing guidance to providing advice, for which you have to be regulated. So we welcomed the decision of the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, to look at this boundary, following calls from my committee to do so. They announced the basis for a joint review with the Treasury about this boundary. They announced that last month. And they said that pending the reform they're going to be bringing forward, they are clarifying now the boundary of the current regime to try and give firms greater confidence to support employees without worrying about getting into difficult territory. The Pensions Dashboard programme is intended to provide people with information online about all of their pension pots, which may well now be numerous, so they can see more clearly how much they're going to have when they retire. That programme ran into difficulties. It had to be reset. As they say, I'm glad, though, that the Pensions Minister has restated the government's commitment to that project to help people engage with their pensions. The pensions industry is going to need to help make dashboards really central, I think, to future retirement planning. People will need to be encouraged to use the dashboard and supported to make good decisions on the basis of the information they find when they do use it. Another important step forward is the DWP's call for evidence on addressing the proliferation of small pension pots as people move jobs and save in different places. I wrote an open letter to the industry about this in July 2020, saying that the committee would look at it in the following year. That was actually preempted by the government's own initiative. But we do need a solution to this in order to get the full benefits from auto-enrolment. It's going to be tricky to deal with both existing small pots around the place and also the steady flow of new ones being created. The DWP has floated the idea of what they call a pot for life. So the idea would be that each individual would contribute to one pot, which they were stayed with lifelong, despite moving between jobs. Now that raises concerns about increasing the burden on employers, because employers are then going to have to deal with potentially lots of different pension schemes to which their employees would belong instead of just one scheme, which is usually the case at the moment. So those are the kind of things I'd be particularly interested to hear views in this forum today about what the right way forward is and what we can do to help schemes and employers do more. We also called for action to address the challenge of people who fall outside the scope of auto-enrolment at the moment because of their employment status. There's been a steep decline in the number of self-employed people saving for a pension since the 1990s. It was around about half of self-employed people then. Most recently, it's been reported as down to 16% of self-employed people compared to 88% of employees who are eligible for auto-enrolment. Various engagement and nudge approaches have been suggested. We don't think they're going to work. We think the solution here is auto-enrolment through the tax and national insurance system. The government hasn't accepted that. I think the Treasury, HMRC, is kind of reluctant to have their systems used in that way. I would say that Nest, the government's own auto-enrolment saving vehicle, has been doing some quite interesting and I think quite important work in this area, but we've definitely not yet got a solution that the government is willing to accept. There's a related challenge over workers in the gig economy. Uber fought bitterly against efforts by its workers to establish their rights to be enrolled into a pension. Uber ultimately lost at the Supreme Court, and we heard from Uber in our inquiry that following that judgment, they developed a model to make auto-enrolment work for gig economy workers, and that is in place for Uber drivers. Uber's competitors, however, have not followed suit. The legal position remains a bit murky. So if you're an Uber driver, typically working with several of the platforms, you can do one journey and get holiday pay and pension contribution as a result of that. And the next one you don't get any of them. The pensions regulator told us that they've got some significant challenges in enforcing auto-enrolment rights in the gig economy. Gig employers have a habit of challenging their enforcement decisions on worker status in the courts at every opportunity they get. We called on the government to legislate here to clarify the employment status of gig economy workers. The government has said it will legislate to do that, but they haven't done it. They've been saying that for several years now. And there is, I think, a lot of unfairness at the moment as a result. So over the last year, we have seen some welcome steps forward. We have seen legislation to extend auto-enrolment. That's now on the statute book. We've got a new focus on tackling the gender pensions gap. We've got a new willingness to address the proliferation of small pension pots, and we've got renewed commitment to the pension dashboard programme. Auto-enrolment has been a big success. If you look back at the history of pensions policy, there haven't been very many recent major policy successes. Auto-enrolment certainly is one. But a huge amount remains to be done if people are to have enough to live on at the point at which they're going to retire. We're going to need a big programme of joint action, yes, from government, but from the industry, from employers, and from individual savers as well. And I'm grateful for the interest that all of you and that REBA is showing in this agenda this morning. Thank you very much.